Hey guys, tonight we step into a place of marble floors and thick perfumed air. You're in ancient Persia, not in the public glare of battlefields or the roaring speeches of kings, but somewhere far quieter. Tonight's story unfolds behind silk curtains, in candlelit corridors, in the subtle glance of a queen who never needed to shout to be heard. You stand in the palace of Susa, where power doesn't always come with a sword. It sometimes arrives in a whisper, in a carefully chosen word, in a glance that turns fate. You'll meet a woman named Atossa, daughter of Cyrus, the great wife of Darius, mother of Xerxes. But more importantly, you'll meet her as the woman who, without holding a title of general or scribe, managed to outmaneuver entire councils of men. And no pressure, but you probably wouldn't survive a day in her sandals. The court is a jungle. It just happens to smell like sandalwood and rosewater. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always lovely to know who's drifting off with me from across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the Queen's chamber now. The doors behind you close without a sound. The air is thick with incense, and the light from small oil lamps dances off polished bronze bowls filled with saffron water. Queen Atossa sits reclined, not quite at ease, not quite tense either. You can feel it in her presence, the stillness before a move, like the way a cat watches a bird too close to the ground. It's 500 BCE. The Achaemenid Empire stretches from the Indus to the Aegean, but here in the palace, all of that might as well be sand on a map. What matters is who controls the man who controls the empire. And right now, that man is Darius, great king, yes, but human still. Fallible, vulnerable. He's not feeling well lately, and that matters. Atossa was born to rule. Daughter of Cyrus the Great, yes, the same Cyrus who built the empire with brains brawn, and a surprisingly effective mix of tolerance and intimidation. You'd think that would make Atossa a loud and confident voice at court. But no, she learned early that real power doesn't need to shout. She learned to wait, to watch. And now Darius, her husband, coughs at night. He sleeps more than usual, and he's begun to speak of dreams. Prophecies of successors. That's your cue to pay attention. The royal court, despite its size and splendor, is a small and intimate cage. There are rivals many, advisors who would steer Darius toward their own sons, their own interests. But Atossa, draped in a gown embroidered with gold thread lotuses, doesn't compete loudly. She listens. The women around her are not idle. Her handmaidens are trained in languages. Her jewelry box has a false bottom. Yes, even 2,500 years ago, secrets had compartments. And the incense she burns, it's not just for fragrance. Certain resins make people talkative. Mainstream historians agree she had unparalleled access. As queen, she could visit Darius when others were refused. She controlled the inner palace, the harem, yes, but also the social heartbeat of the elite. Quirky sources even suggest she organized reading circles among noble women, sharing tales from Greek slaves. A bedtime story or two about hubris and downfall useful. Historians still argue whether she held formal titles. Some call her the first real empress in recorded history. Others say her influence was informal, like silk threading through armor. Either way, tonight you watch her move between chambers, like a breeze unseen, but everywhere. Outside the palace, the moon reflects off the dark canals of Susa. You can hear frogs croaking in the gardens, imported frogs, mind you. Persian elites like their sound. Inside, Atossa quietly drafts a letter. It's not addressed to Darius, not directly. It's for the high priest of the fire temple. The content, a simple question about dreams and omens. But beneath that, a test. Will this priest confirm that the king's dreams signal the rise of his son, and which son Atossa knows how to seed interpretations? A word here, a metaphor there. This is a game of slow-motion chess, and she is the queen who moves in diagonals. Always diagonals. Later that night, as Darius stirs in sleep, murmuring half-phrases about the sea and the land of copper, Atossa is already speaking with her nursemaid in whispers. Not about sickness, about preparation. Just as a merchant prepares for a shift in the wind, so does Atossa. You lie back sensing the rhythm of the palace, the hum of tension, the silk rugs muffle footsteps. Outside her chamber, a bronze dish chimes softly midnight. Somewhere in the distance, a eunuch sings a lullaby for another queen's child. It echoes gently. Atossa does not sleep. Not yet. Her eyes are open. She is mapping something out, not in ink, not on papyrus, but in people. The king is weakening, and in that quiet unraveling, she sees a tapestry she can reweave. You wake, or rather you never really slept. The palace doesn't allow for deep rest. It hums at night with the weight of its own breathing. You rise from the silken mat, where you drifted into half-thoughts and shuffle softly toward the king's chambers. Not because you're summoned, but because Atossa is. You follow her close behind, as though you are one of her invisible shadows. King Darius lies on a ceremonial bed, elevated, slightly draped in linens, dyed with the rarest blue imported from Phoenicia. His eyes are closed, but his breath is strained. Not dramatic, not fatal, but off. You can hear it, a small catch in the throat, a pause that lingers just a beat too long. There are physicians, of course, Babylonian, Median, even one from far-off Carthage who smells like olive oil and fennel. But it's Atossa who brings the remedy that works something simple, a paste of crushed figs, date wine, and a dash of Egyptian resin. She learned it, she says softly, from a slave girl who claimed her grandmother once served the house of Pharaoh. You're not sure if that's true. Neither is Darius. But he lets the queen feed him the mixture with her own hands. That more than the figs or wine seems to calm him. Atossa smiles. Just slightly. You see now, this isn't about medicine. This is about proximity. She uses the illness, real though it is, as a door. A reason to be near him when others are not. To whisper gently when he's half awake. To remind him over and over of one particular name, Xerxes. Xerxes, her son, not his only son, of course, but hers. Born of noble Persian blood, descended from Cyrus himself. That matters. Lineage is everything in this world. You can be brave, smart, even beautiful, but if your father isn't carved on a relief wall somewhere, good luck. Atossa's timing is impeccable. She introduces the idea not like a demand, but like a memory. You remember how Xerxes rode that stubborn white mare last spring, she says with a chuckle. Not even the cavalry chief could control her. But Xerxes, he just whispered to her, and she obeyed. It's a gentle story told at the right moment in a room where Darius's strength is draining and the air smells of cedar and cardamom. You can see it settle in the king's mind like dust in a corner. Historians still argue whether Atossa manipulated Darius into naming Xerxes as successor or if it was his plan all along. But let's be honest, who whispers most often in your ear when you're tired, weak, and craving figs? There's a moment here, an odd, almost funny one, where Atossa pretends to trip. Yes, you heard that right. The Queen of Persia, custodian of silk routes and dynastic bloodlines, stumbles while entering Darius's chamber. Drops her gold-dipped brush. 2 servants rush to help. Darius opens one eye. Atossa laughs it off, graceful as ever. But you can see it's no accident. Her fall brings attention to her presence, to her persistence. Even the gods notice those who move boldly and humbly at once. Later in her own chambers, she presses a cloth soaked in mint water to her brow. The desert heat never leaves, not really even when the moon is high. Beside her, a tray of herbs is being sorted by an older woman, one of her personal attendants from her father's reign. The woman grumbles about the court. Too many Medes, not enough real Persians. Too much Greek influence. Atossa listens without correcting. Then calmly she lifts a jar of crushed henna. dips her fingers, paints a perfect spiral on the inside of her wrist. Remind me, she murmurs what symbol means inheritance in the old temple script, the woman tells her. It's not about the spiral, it's about making someone say it aloud. You walk with Atossa through the palace's herb gardens. It's nearly dawn now. The stars fade behind the eastern wall, and roosters not Persian, but imported from Lydian stock start to call out. The queen pauses near a bush of bitter oranges. There's always a cure, she says quietly. Sometimes the disease is power, and the cure is timing. She plucks an orange and hands it to you. Bitter indeed. Back in the outer courtyard, a priest waits with scrolls, omens, dreams, visions, submitted by citizens across the empire. Most are nonsense. I dreamt of snakes beneath my floorboards. I saw a lion kiss a goat, but Atossa scans them all. She's looking for patterns or excuses, and then she finds one. A merchant from Sardis claims he saw a black sun rise from the sea and a lion-shaped cloud block the moon. He thinks it means doom, the priest says with a chuckle. Atossa nods. He's not wrong, but it depends on whose doom. She circles one phrase, black sun. Later that day, you hear the phrase echoed by a court astrologer in a speech Darius himself attends. The words didn't just travel, they were planted. Atossa doesn't need to tell Darius that the omens favor Xerxes. She just needs others to suggest it, enough times, in enough ways, quietly. That night, as the king sleeps again, breathing easier now, Atossa sits nearby, embroidering a pattern into a square of crimson cloth. Not a lion, not a star, just a spiral, always spiraling inward. The scent hits you before anything else, cardamom, musk, and something almost metallic like fresh ink on papyrus. You trail just behind Atossa as she enters the royal weaving hall, a domed chamber humming with the gentle clack of looms and the whisper of silk threads. This is not a place of battle plans or decrees, and yet power threads itself here quite literally. The hall is quiet but alive. Dozens of women seated cross-legged manipulate looms faster than your eyes can follow. Gold thread gleams in the morning sun that pours through lattice windows. Every robe produced here will clothe someone of influence, someone who might one day decide who inherits what, who commands whom. Atossa walks slowly through the hall. To others, she is inspecting the fabrics. But you notice how often she pauses not at the most ornate garments, but at those with specific patterns, knots that mirror old Avestan symbols, spirals again, serpents twisted into vines, motifs only the educated would spot. She doesn't need to speak. A glance, a nod, a hand brushing the hem of a nearly finished robe. Those are her orders. Later, one of these robes will end up in the wardrobe of a key advisor. Its message will go unnoticed by most but not all, especially not by a man trained to read nuance. Mainstream historians confirm Atossa's control of royal textiles. Her taste shaped what was worn at court, and therefore what was seen at court. But there's a quirkier detail too. Several ancient sources suggest she was the first royal patron of silk in the Persian court. Yes, silk smuggled along embryonic trade routes from the East centuries before the Silk Road became formalized. She was said to be fascinated by how silk caught the light. It reveals everything she once told a court servant. It clings to power like breath on glass. You trail her into a smaller chamber, her private dye room. It smells like crushed beetles and fermented indigo, not exactly luxurious, but this is where things become real. No delegation, no symbolism, just stains. Atossa dips her hands into a vat of dark blue. Not because she needs to, but because she wants to know the weight of it, the permanence. What lingers? I like indigo, she says softly. It hides what it must until the light changes. One of the palace weavers, a young Elamite woman with deft hands and sharper ears, kneels beside Atossa and whispers news a shipment of Babylonian wool arrived, with messages tucked in the hems. That's not unusual. Messages in robes, notes in shoe soles, those are court staples. But this one says something different. It says there is talk in the outer provinces that Xerxes is too young, that Darius should name Artabazanes instead his eldest, but born of a lesser mother. Atossa blinks slowly. Then she does something you weren't expecting. She laughs, a soft, warm, disarming chuckle, as if someone just told her a joke with a long setup and no punchline. Too young, she murmurs. The gods delight in youth. And besides, boys grow fast when the sun is pointed at them. You remember that because hours later, she arranges for Xerxes to lead a ceremonial harvest procession. Public, bright, symbolic. He rides at the front, flanked by generals dressed in deep blue like the dye from this very chamber. Everyone sees him, and then they can't unsee him. Historians still debate whether this moment was orchestrated to sway Darius or simply reinforce his leaning. But that's the thing about Atossa, everything looks effortless, even when it's written in thread and worn like armor. You walk back through the palace halls as a warm breeze lifts the embroidered curtains. You glimpse the world through slits of silk and sunlight. Servants bustle quietly, scribes scurry with scrolls, and nobles glide like shadows. And then by the far courtyard, you see something peculiar. A nobleman, one of the king's cousins, skeptical of Atossa's growing influence, is wearing a robe dyed half red, half gold. It's a garish thing, unapproved, loud, trying too hard. Atossa sees it too, says nothing. But later, as you sit in her chamber, sipping rose water, a new robe is delivered to her by one of the silent servants. Midnight blue stitched with gold spirals and a tiny motif of twin lions, symbol of rightful dual heritage, Cyrus and Darius. She doesn't say who it's for, but the next time that cousin appears in public, he's wearing it. The lesson here isn't just about fashion. It's about control, who defines what is tasteful, proper, and royal. You don't need to shout when you control the mirror that reflects the world. And Atossa. She's designing the mirror. As the day ends, you follow her once more to her balcony. Below, the sun dips behind the Zagros Mountains. She holds up a piece of silk between two fingers and lets the dying light shine through it. It's always changing, she murmurs, but never disappearing. Neither is she. The sound of hooves echoes faintly in the distance as you drift behind Atossa through a corridor that smells faintly of ink leather and lemon balm. This wing of the palace feels different, less ornamental, more functional. Less silk, more scrolls. This is where messages travel faster than horses, where the empire breathes through words. The Royal Courier Hall, a seemingly dull series of offices and storage rooms, holds the pulse of an empire that stretches across deserts, mountains, rivers, and languages. Here letters arrive from Sardis, from Bactria, from Egypt. Clay tablets, wax-sealed notes, reeds etched with ink still wet from Babylon. And here Atossa makes her most understated move. You watch her step lightly among scribes, mostly men, hunched over tablets, murmuring over translation errors and signature verifications. They barely register her presence. She prefers it that way. She's not here to interfere. She's here to listen, to reroute. According to many mainstream accounts, Atossa helped formalize a system of mounted couriers, the backbone of what would become the first true postal network in recorded history, the Angorium. It connected vast swaths of land with almost unbelievable speed for its time. But here's the fringe detail no textbook dwells on whispers. Say some of those couriers weren't men on horseback, but women trained inside the palace, educated in multiple languages, and disguised in traveling robes. Maid couriers, the older scribes grumbled, but their records impeccable. You follow Atossa as she passes one such woman in a corner, her hands ink-stained, her eyes sharp. Atossa doesn't greet her, just a nod. That's all. Moments later, a sealed letter is handed to Atossa, unsigned. She reads it, lips moving silently. A report from Lydia rumblings of dissent among regional satraps. One name stands out, an official who recently received gifts from artabazanes. The timing isn't coincidence. It's positioning. The idea that Darius might choose his eldest son is gaining traction in the provinces. But Atossa, she knows how to respond without responding. The next day, several satraps receive parcels not from the king, but from the queen. Small gifts, dried saffron, a new type of date imported from India, a sash embroidered with the symbol of the twin lions. Nothing overt. But in Persia, symbolism is currency, and Atossa spends it generously. Later that afternoon, you sit beside her as she dictates a personal letter not to a governor or advisor, but to her sister in Zogdia. The content, a charming, meandering description of a new spice vendor in Susa, a dream she had about riding elephants, and a quiet concern that the empire is beginning to sway like a cypress in wind. Poetic, sure, but embedded within are references, hints, names. This isn't idle gossip, it's calibrated ripple-making. Historians still argue whether Atossa intended to use this postal web as a tool of diplomacy or soft espionage. But the pattern is clear. She doesn't need messengers who shout. She needs messengers who whisper well. One particularly funny moment happens when a Greek slave working in the scribe's room accidentally opens a letter meant for the queen herself. He's caught mid-read, eyes wide, before realizing the text is a riddle written in old Persian code. The guard sees him. Atossa, hearing the commotion, arrives. She glances at the man, then takes the letter from his hand, reads it aloud perfectly elegantly, and smiles. It says the apricots from Elam are disappointing this year. She waves the guards off. Whether that was the real content or a cover remains anyone's guess. As evening falls, you're escorted to the map room, a private chamber few even know exists. Hidden behind a false tapestry, it's dimly lit and cool, lined with scrolls and rough charcoal sketches on clay tiles. Atossa runs her fingers along a map of the empire, drawn not with perfect scale, but with symbols: the wolf for the north, the scorpion for the deserts, the fish for coastal ports. Her own code. Here she doesn't just read messages, she plots them, patterns, delays, disturbances, and she sees something you don't. Information travels faster than soldiers, she says quietly, and it's harder to stop. Then she points to a thin line running between Sardis and Babylon. This is where I must plant a story, she whispers, one that arrives before the truth does. You don't ask what that story is. You just watch her draft the message, her handwriting small and slanted, deliberate. She doesn't sign her name. She doesn't need to. The seal she presses onto the wax 2 concentric spirals is enough. The same symbol stitched into those blue robes. It marks her influence hidden in plain sight. Somewhere a courier mounts a horse. Somewhere else a merchant tucks the letter into a wine crate. Somewhere further still, a satrap will open that message and find himself subtly redirected. Back in the map room, Atossa leans back and exhales. The empire is massive, but her reach, it's faster. You return to the harem not as a visitor this time, but as something more like a shadow. The courtyard glows with the kind of filtered sunlight that turns gold through lattice screens. Women lounge on cushions, chatting softly, combing one another's hair, embroidering silks that may never leave these walls. The scent is honeyed dates, dried apricots, and sweet almond oil. It's deceptively calm. You'd think this was a place of idle luxury. You'd be wrong, because this is where Atossa listens best. You take a seat near a tiled fountain, pretending to study the way water catches in the grooves of marble. Around you, voices rise and fall like birdsong. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to catch patterns. One woman mentions a Greek slave who started telling stories in the evenings, tales of gods and monsters, but also of city-state strategies, clever wars won by deception rather than force. Another recounts a dream she had: a sea turned to glass, and a woman walking across it. Atossa, reclining nearby with a fig in hand, raises one eyebrow. She doesn't respond, not yet, but you can see it the way she catalogs even idle gossip. To her, nothing is ever truly idle. The Greeks, after all, are more than prisoners now. They're windows into something strange and dangerous and familiar. A world that resists conquest not just with swords, but with stories. Atossa rises. Quietly, she asks to see the storyteller. Later that night, beneath lamplight soft as moon glow, she meets him, a Greek captive with sunburnt skin and eyes too clever by half. He bows. She waves him off, asks only that he tell her one story, a true one, from his homeland. And so he does. Not of gods, not of Heracles, not of Titans. He tells her of a city that fought off an empire once, that had no king, only citizens, that voted on war, that debated before deciding to die for their land. Athens. It's not a boast. He tells it plainly, as though reciting a market inventory. But Atossa leans in. A city with no king, she repeats softly. And yet it lives. Barely the man replies. But yes, you'd think she'd dismiss it, laugh, or call it foolish. But instead she asks questions. How do they choose leaders? How are soldiers trained? How far are they from the sea? What are their weak points? The man answers, carefully aware he's feeding a lioness. Historians still argue whether this conversation really happened, whether Atossa's interest in the Greeks influenced later decisions by Darius and Xerxes to march westward. But several accounts agree she was the first to press for a deeper understanding of the Greek world. Not just to defeat it, but to understand what made it tick. That night you're seated again in her private chamber. The Greek has gone. Atossa pours herself pomegranate wine and stares into the hearth, where embers pulse gently like desert stars. They've built their strength around argument, she says almost to herself. Imagine that. A war of words, not spears. She chuckles soft and strange. Then she asks her scribe to begin a new scroll. It's not a decree, not a strategy. It's a list of Greek city-states, names you've never heard before: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Delphi, Thebes. A list that will shape the future. A candle burns low beside her, casting the list in bronze-red light. She taps one name with her ring finger. Athens, she murmurs. That one sings too loudly. You start to notice a change in the harem in the days that follow. The music shifts. Greek lyres are played more often. Dancers begin incorporating foreign footwork. One of the cooks even starts experimenting with olive-based sauces. Atossa doesn't command it. She just allows it. Encourages curiosity under the guise of entertainment. It's brilliant. To weaponize culture as softly as one diffuses perfume. And she doesn't just listen to Greeks. You witness her draw in voices from Babylonian scholars, Egyptian herbalists, Scythian travelers, Phoenician traders. All under the harem's dome, all wrapped in comfort and fruit and song. Because when you're soft enough, people stop guarding their sharpest truths. One day you pass a stone bench near the bathhouse, where Atossa is seated with three younger women. They're playing a game with carved tiles, some early form of chess perhaps, and speaking of love loss and the limits of kings. She asked me once, one whispers, if I believe men ever truly ruled alone. They laugh. But you don't. Because you've seen her hands on the loom, the map, the wine cup, the scroll, and now on people. Gently guiding, gently shifting, gently winning. The Greeks may have no king, but Persia has a queen. The corridor leading to Atossa's private quarters feels quieter today, but not empty. There's an energy tense, coiled, deliberate. Servants speak in lower tones. Curtains have been pulled tighter. Somewhere in the background, a flute plays a haunting melody, almost swallowed by the walls. You follow her through the hush, past a mosaic of twin lions and a carved pillar shaped like a lotus bloom. She doesn't speak, not yet. You reach a door guarded by two eunuchs in silver-threaded robes. They nod and let her pass. What lies beyond is not another lounge, not another garden. It's the queen's secret, a room tucked behind an ornamental tapestry hidden from even the curious elite. The temperature shifts as you enter, cooler shaded from the Persian sun. Shelves line the walls stacked with scrolls, tablets, ink pots, and more unusually scraps of parchment bearing maps. Not maps like generals use, but personal ones. Crude, symbolic, annotated in 3 languages. You spot the spiral symbol again, marking key ports, narrow valleys, even watering holes in deserts. Atossa walks slowly along the wall, running her fingers across the names. Sardis, the Bosporus, Memphis, Marathon. This is not the empire, she says softly. This is how it breathes. Mainstream historians acknowledge Darius's love for cartography and planning, but here you see a different kind of geography, emotional, psychological, intuitive. Not who holds which territory, but why they do, how they might lose it. And Atossa knows where it bends. She points to a sketch of the Aegean coast. It's not to scale. The islands float like petals on a painted breeze. But one name is circled twice, Naxos. Do you see, she asks? They fight each other, the Greeks, like quarrelsome birds, but that makes them harder to trap. You nod, she continues. If they ever unite, even briefly, that would be the storm. It's quiet for a moment. You can hear the scratch of ink as she notes something new, a symbol beside Naxos. A crescent moon, her private notation for uncertainty. Potential. She sits on a low stool and unwraps a bundle of wax tablets. They're reports, recent ones, gathered from her web of scribes and maid couriers. There are rumors of rebellion in Egypt, grain shortages near Ecbatana, but she flips past those. Her focus is Greece, specifically Athens, and more specifically the way the Athenians are speaking of Persia. You learn that some Greek envoys have recently mocked the empire in open forums, claiming Persians drown in robes and are led by women who whisper in shadows. Atossa smiles. Do you think words can wound, she asks you. You hesitate. She doesn't. They're not meant to, she continues, but they travel faster than arrows. And sometimes they find softer spots. Historians still argue whether this moment marks the true beginning of Persia's interest in Athenian affairs. But one thing is certain, Atossa takes these rumors personally and strategically. She doesn't write a response. She does something more dangerous. She begins to prepare for attention. Later that evening, a small clay model of a trireme, a Greek warship, is delivered to her chambers by a merchant's child. It's a curiosity, something meant to amuse. But Atossa studies it intently, tracing its form, memorizing the slender shape. They are quick, she murmurs, but not made for long storms. You see her sketching something, then a shape in profile, a rough outline of a Persian transport ship. Bigger, slower, but with a deeper hull. She isn't a shipwright, but she's planting the seed of comparison. And you know what happens to seeds in her care. Outside, thunder rumbles, the rare desert storm, the kind that rolls across the mountains like a god stretching its limbs. Inside, the storm is quieter. Atossa turns to a shelf and draws down a papyrus scroll faded old. You recognize it as Egyptian. She unrolls it slowly to reveal diagrams, irrigation systems, battle formations, even something that looks like a lens. These, she says, were drawn for pharaohs who thought the world was theirs, and now their bones are dust. You ask why she keeps them. She replies, because they remind me how fragile power is, and how maps are not made of stone. She gently folds the scroll. You realize then that this room isn't just a map archive or a secret study. It's a memory palace, a vault of symbols, of vulnerabilities, of whispers waiting for echo. You glance again at the crescent mark near Naxos. It will be Greece, she says, almost as if tasting the word. Not yet, but soon. They've stirred the water. She looks at you calm and unsmiling. And water remembers. The heat in Egypt feels different. You're not in Persia anymore. Or rather, you're not just in Persia. You're in Atossa's mind as she watches the empire stretch westward, like a hand unfurling across parchment. She's never set foot in Egypt, but somehow she's already there. You follow her through the halls of the palace as she receives another shipment from the Nile papyrus scrolls, perfumes sealed in alabaster strange beads with scarab carvings. Officially their tribute, unofficially their signals, proof that Persia now rules the land once ruled by pharaohs. You expect a reaction, a grand announcement, a feast maybe, but Atossa simply nods and unpacks a vial of lotus oil with practiced calm. She didn't raise a sword, someone whispers in the corner, and yet here we are. That's the truth of it. Egypt has been conquered. The armies moved, the banners changed, but the groundwork, that was hers. Soft power sent years earlier in the form of envoys bearing gifts of couriers with quiet agreements of silk-robed women who spoke Greek and Aramaic equally well. Mainstream historians credit Darius with the conquest of Egypt. That's fair, but fringe accounts suggest that before the armies moved, Atossa moved minds. You remember those letters she planted? One of them went to an Egyptian high priest, another to a satrap who governed a trade route linking the Red Sea to Memphis. Her fingerprints know, her fragrance are on every parchment, and yet she remains in Susa, a queen on a divan sipping wine steeped in myrrh, speaking slowly. She wanted them to want it, a court scribe once joked, referring to Egypt. She made surrender taste like invitation. You walk with her to the Hall of Offerings. Rows of tribute line the marble-woven baskets from the Nile Delta ivory combs, scrolls inked in demotic script. Atossa runs her fingers across a carved ankh. What does this mean again? She asks the high priest at her side. Life, he says. She smiles. And who gives it? He hesitates. You, my queen. Good answer. One of the Egyptian ambassadors, a lean man with elegant robes and heavy rings, approaches Atossa and bows. He speaks with reverence, but also with curiosity. You know our customs well, he says. I know the silence between them better, she replies. The man blinks. Historians still argue whether this moment marked a formal shift in Persian-Egyptian cultural blending. But you can see it, Atossa doesn't conquer. She absorbs. Days later, you see a strange scene unfold in her chamber, dancers performing a fusion of Persian and Egyptian steps. The music, a blend of reed flute and harp. It's mesmerizing, slow, spiraling, hypnotic. She watches with half-closed eyes, murmuring notes to her attendants. This isn't entertainment. This is intel gathering, observing the edges where cultures merge or reject each other. She orders a new robe to be woven not in traditional Persian blue, but in ivory and gold with papyrus and lotus motifs sewn into the hem. When she wears it, whispers ripple through the court. She's dressing like a pharaoh, one noble mutters. She is a pharaoh, another replies. Atossa doesn't correct them. You watch her draft another letter, not to Darius this time, but to a temple scribe in Thebes. The letter discusses the availability of Nile flax, but embedded within is a subtle directive about reorganizing grain storage. A preemptive move against famine just in case Egypt's Fertile Crescent falters under Persian management. She thinks ahead, always. That night by the balcony where the moon casts long shadows through palmwood slats, you hear her speak softly to one of her trusted advisors. They thought they were untouched, that the Nile made them immune to change. She turns the stem of a pomegranate in her fingers, but rivers are just long mirrors. They reflect whatever leans over them long enough, and she is leaning. You glance at the tray beside her, dates stuffed with nuts sprinkled with something pale. Coriander, she says without looking. An acquired taste. Like empire. She leans back, eyes half-lidded, listening to the night birds. Below, a new batch of Egyptian textiles has arrived, and somewhere in the harem, laughter breaks out over the strange feel of the cloth, lighter, cooler, woven with wind instead of heat. You realize that Egypt didn't fall. It willingly shifted. A turn of the body, a yielding. Because when Atossa walks through an empire, even if only in thought the empire tilts toward her, you awaken to a sharp stillness in the palace, a hush so complete it feels like a warning. The birds are late to sing, the fountains seem quieter. Even the eunuchs pad more softly across the floors. Inside Atossa's quarters, the air has changed. It's cooler, but not from the breeze. It's the tension that does it. You sit just beyond the veil that separates her private lounge from the rest of the harem. Through the fine mesh of golden threads, you see her seated upright, not lounging as usual, not cradling wine or playing with fruit, but still eyes fixed on a letter resting on her lap like a live snake. A messenger delivered it at dawn. The contents Artaxerxes has begun gathering support for his claim to the throne. You've heard the name before. He's Darius's eldest born of a lesser wife before Darius took the crown. Older than Xerxes, ambitious, careful, and dangerous because he's just legitimate enough to cause trouble. Atossa doesn't speak. Instead, she picks up a thin hairpin and begins twisting it absent-mindedly through her fingers. Her face is unreadable, but you know better. Inside, the storm has already begun. In the halls beyond, you hear voices, male voices, counselors arguing over succession, citing bloodlines, seniority, military experience. But here behind the curtain, a very different kind of campaign is already underway. Atossa summons her sons. Xerxes arrives first, younger, broader in the shoulders, but with a hesitation in his steps. Not fear, deference. He bows low and she doesn't return the gesture. She studies him, searching. "Would you rule if I asked you not to?" she says. He hesitates. "No." "Good. You think it's a test, but maybe it's a prayer." Artaxerxes, meanwhile, writes letters to the satraps, especially those in the eastern provinces. He promises balance, stability, reminders of birth order. Atossa sends no such letters. Instead, she sends gifts, a carved obsidian bowl to one satrap's wife, who happens to be a childhood friend of Atossa, a physician to another satrap's son who'd recently fallen ill, and to one famously undecided noble, a rare Babylonian charm said to prevent treason, wrapped, of course, in silk with twin lion embroidery. This is not flattery. This is debt. Mainstream records confirm Darius's eventual decision to name Xerxes as heir. Some say it was Atossa's noble lineage that sealed it. Others say she pressured him. Still others claim she offered quiet assurances that Xerxes would protect Darius's legacy more faithfully than any older son. But deep in the palace, you witness the moment strategy becomes personal. One afternoon, a tray arrives at Atossa's chamber. Upon it, a bowl of olives. They look ordinary, but Atossa lifts one to her nose, pauses, and sets it down. "Too sharp," she says. "Throw them away." She doesn't explain. Later, you hear that a servant was dismissed silently without scandal. The olives came from a region loyal to Artaxerxes. A message, a mistake Atossa doesn't wait to find out. She plays no games with poison. That night, as you walk with her through the garden, she stops beneath a fig tree, planted years earlier by Darius himself. Its branches are heavy now, too low. She takes a small blade from her sleeve and snips a few away, letting them fall. Too much growth and the fruit spoils, she says. The metaphor doesn't need explaining. Soon after, you hear the news whispered through the marble halls. Darius has made his decision. He has chosen Xerxes and Atossa. She doesn't smile. She rests a hand on the back of her neck as if lifting a weight that was hers alone. But you see the servants change how they walk past her. See how advisors now offer their greetings with slightly longer bows. See how even the high priest pauses before speaking her name aloud. Because now everyone knows the next king of Persia isn't just the son of a king, he's the son of Atossa. Yet there's no celebration in her chamber, no feast, no harpist playing victory songs. Instead, she sits alone plucking pomegranate seeds from their white cradle, dropping them one by one into a silver bowl. Plink, plink, plink. And beneath that sound, one truth repeats. This was never about ambition. This was about continuity, about weaving the next chapter before the ink on the last one even dried. She had pulled the thread tight, not with force, but with care, consistency, and silence. Historians still puzzle over the smoothness of the succession. So little blood, so little noise. But you know better. She made it look easy. That was the hardest part. By now you've come to expect whispers wherever Atossa walks. But today the whispers don't follow her, they precede her. You trail her through a hallway perfumed with orange blossom and myrrh, where the marble underfoot reflects candlelight like shallow water. You notice something strange. The guards along the corridor aren't just standing straighter, they're watching more carefully. A dancer slips out of view behind a curtain. A kitchen boy stares too long at a silver tray as if it might speak. Atossa notices too. Of course she does. She doesn't change pace. But as you follow her into the Hall of Perfume Halls, an informal name for a section of the inner palace where musicians, practice dancers stretch, and advisors pretend to relax, you feel it. The spies have begun to spy on each other. Atossa settles into a cushioned alcove and calls for music, not too loud. Something from Phoenicia played on lyres and soft drums. A group of dancers glides into view, all grace and painted eyes, their hands telling stories older than the empire itself. But Atossa is not watching the dancers. She's watching who else is watching them. There's a scribe pretending to transcribe lyrics, a eunuch adjusting the same vase 3 times in 5 minutes, a visiting court musician whose eyes flick too often toward the queen. You begin to understand something fundamental. This is no leisure hall. This is a hunting ground, not of violence but of information. And Atossa, she's already caught something in her net. Mainstream historians might focus on kings and generals, but Persian court life was built on soft tension, on small betrayals wrapped in soft cloth. Atossa understood this better than anyone, and she had tools. The harpist, for example, was once a diplomat's son. He knows 5 languages and can hear whispers beneath applause. The servant pouring wine was trained by Atossa's former wet nurse, who herself had once lived in the harem of Cyrus the Great. The perfumer, a master of oils, yes, but also of timing, he knows who passes which hallway at which hour. Quirky sources even suggest she had a code system for scent. Jasmine for security, rose for suspicion, myrrh for action. Today the air is thick with rose. Atossa beckons one of her attendants, a young woman with clever eyes and a slight limp from a childhood fall. She whispers something brief, barely moving her lips. Within the hour, the eunuch from earlier is reassigned. Not punished, not questioned, just replaced. No scandal, no trace. The palace adjusts itself like a cat settling into new sunbeams. You follow Atossa deeper into her network. She meets a court entertainer in a quieter room, an old man with crooked fingers and a laugh like rustling parchment. He used to juggle figs, once made Darius laugh so hard he spilled wine on his robes. But now he tells stories. He recounts a tale, allegorical of course, about a garden where 2 flowers competed for sunlight and a third flower watched quietly, storing its energy. Atossa listens intently, then asks, "And which flower survived the drought?" He bows. "The one that grew deeper roots." Historians still argue whether Atossa ran an actual espionage network within the palace. There's no proof in ink, no scroll that bears her orders. But then she wouldn't have written it down. She trusted perfume, eye contact, body language, silence. Later that night, you pass through the harem corridors and see something subtle but new, a tapestry being replaced. The old one depicted a lion chasing a deer. The new one, 2 cranes flying in opposite directions, wings nearly touching. You pause. It's a message. Not to you, but to someone else in the palace. Maybe a general, maybe a foreign emissary, maybe even Darius. Atossa doesn't need to say it aloud. Her palace has become her language, and she speaks it fluently. There's one moment that lingers as she prepares for bed. She removes a single anklet and sets it on the low table beside her. The silver is twisted into a spiral, the same design from her scrolls, her robes, her seal. But this one has a tiny stone embedded in the center. Onyx, dark and smooth. She touches it. I once asked a friend to wear this into the satrap's court in Bactria. She says absently. Did it work, you ask? She smiles faintly. He married the satrap's niece, and she now writes to me twice a year. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't need to. The music in the palace fades. The dancers retire. The guards return to their positions none the wiser. But Atossa. She's just removed another name from her list. Quietly, elegantly, with rose in the air. Tonight there's a feast in the palace. Not just any feast, a royal banquet in the Hall of Pillars, that vast space of gleaming stone and shadow where the high ceilings catch the echoes of clinking cups and exaggerated laughter. You walk beside Atossa as she glides through the entrance in a robe dyed deep indigo, embroidered with silk lions so subtle they only shimmer under torchlight. It's a celebration of peace, or so the scroll says. No mention of succession, no trace of rivalry, no hint that the future of the empire hinges on who sits where. But that's the game, isn't it? You watch as courtiers gather like colored tiles, forming a shifting mosaic. Nobles from Bactria and Babylon, envoys from the Nile satraps with their jeweled wives, generals with sun-darkened hands. And the seating, oh, the seating is everything. You spot it right away. Xerxes is seated to the right of Darius, a position of prominence just barely less than that of the king himself. Artaxerxes is farther down the table next to a satrap whose loyalty is currently fluid. Coincidence, please. Atossa walks past them all, not hurrying, not lingering. She acknowledges each with a glance, a brief smile, a slight tilt of the chin that says, I see you. And I remember. Mainstream historians have written about this banquet the moment Darius symbolically aligned himself with Xerxes in full public view. But what they leave out is this: it wasn't Darius who arranged the seating chart. It was the queen. She had worked with the head steward days in advance, reassigned cushions, swapped goblets, even dictated which wines would be poured first and in whose cup. Why? Because every detail speaks. The general seated beside Xerxes receives a goblet filled first. The priest nearest Artaxerxes served last. You sit behind Atossa on a dais just slightly elevated from the long, glittering table. From here, you see how everybody leans, how every conversation arcs. You notice how a nervous satrap looks to Xerxes before answering a question from Darius. The court is taking its cue. The empire is adjusting, all while Atossa dips a grape in honey and chews slowly. There's a moment when Darius gestures for silence. He rises, voice booming, just enough to echo. He praises the unity of the realm, the strength of its provinces, the wisdom of its gods. And then he pauses, a calculated pause. He looks to his right, to Xerxes. My son, he says, in whom I have placed my hopes. The room holds its breath like a bowl holds wine tense, trembling close to spilling. Xerxes bows. Artaxerxes blinks, expression unreadable. Applause follows. Cheers. Toast, but the mood is different now. The future has been named not through declaration, but through position. Historians still debate whether this moment was spontaneous or orchestrated, whether Darius knew what he was doing or was simply swept by Atossa's undertow. But as you glance at the queen still seated, still quiet, you know. She doesn't look triumphant. She looks focused. The second half of the banquet is lighter dancers, returned jesters perform. A trickster juggles figs and nearly drops one into the lap of a particularly humorless general. Laughter bubbles, wine flows, and conversation shifts back to grain taxes and border gossip. And yet beneath it all, something new has settled. You walk with Atossa after the feast down a corridor lit by lamps made of polished bronze. The oil flickers and paints shadows on the walls, shadows that seem longer than they should be. She speaks only once. Tonight they tasted certainty, she says. You nod. But then she adds something else, something softer. Certainty spoils faster than doubt. We must preserve it carefully. In her chamber, she removes her earrings and places them in a lacquered box. Each piece of jewelry is stored with quiet reverence, not for beauty, but for memory. Every gem holds a moment, a meeting, a promise, a shift. You see a small piece tucked in the corner, a carved ivory horse. A gift perhaps, a symbol. She catches your glance. A trinket from Xerxes, she says. From before he knew how to ride one. Her voice is amused but not indulgent. He was afraid to fall, she continues. So I told him, better to fall now while your bones are soft than later when your crown is heavy. And fall he did. Once, maybe twice. But tonight he stood, because she built the saddle first. You sit quietly as the fire burns low. Somewhere outside, dogs bark faintly near the palace gates. The guards change shifts with soft footfalls in the steel that never fully sleeps. The empire for tonight feels still, but you know better. Stillness is just the pause between movements. And Atossa, she's already composing the next one. You find her in the gardens long before dawn. The stars are still out, barely fading in the pale blue that precedes morning. The city of Susa sleeps, but Atossa is already walking barefoot, quiet, slow. Her robe brushes the dew-laced grass, and her breath hangs in the chill air, like a second whisper. The banquet is over. Xerxes has been positioned. Artaxerxes has been silenced without a word. Darius has offered his nod to the world. But Atossa is not celebrating. She's planting. The garden is not ornamental, at least not entirely. Alongside the roses and myrtle are rows of medicinal herbs, mint, chicory, hyssop, bitter almond. Between them, flowering trees older than some provinces, and woven throughout walking paths so precise they mirror constellations when viewed from the royal tower above. You trail her as she stops near a cluster of fig trees. These were from Babylon, she murmurs, brushing a leaf. They don't grow well here unless you speak to them kindly. You wonder if that's a joke. But she's not smiling. Instead, she kneels and begins pressing something into the soil. A bulb. 2, then 3. Crocus, maybe. You can't quite see. She covers them gently. No one asked how the garden stays alive, she says. They just admire the flowers. And that's the point, isn't it? You remember that night after the olives, how she noticed the scent before the plot, how she traced treachery to a bowl of fruit. This is the same instinct, a queen who sees beneath bloom to root. The palace wakes slowly. Servants open shutters, birds begin their tentative morning calls, and Darius, still unwell, asks for warm honey water before sunrise. But Atossa remains in the garden, her hands now stained with dirt, her eyes watching the sky change color, one careful shade at a time. When she finally rises, it's not to return indoors, but to walk toward a small pavilion near the garden's edge. Their 2 advisors wait, not summoned, but drawn. You recognize them. One oversees grain shipments, the other manages internal security. She speaks to them plainly. Have the Nile barges been delayed? Yes, by early flooding, the first says. Then release the reserve stock from Persepolis. Quietly. The second man frowns. That could cause rumors. Better a whisper of abundance than a shout of hunger, she replies. They nod. Historians confirm a strange consistency in food availability during Darius's late reign, even when harvests were poor or transport was disrupted. It's often credited to efficient administration. But here you are, watching the real efficiency, a queen with her own reserves. Hidden granaries managed by women no one questions. Old nursemaids turned stewards. Former dancers who now oversee spice weights. One of them, a short woman with silver-threaded hair and a fierce squint, approaches Atossa with a clay tablet. Grain tallies. She points to the numbers, makes a sharp gesture. Too much leaving the Sogdian storehouses. Something isn't right. Atossa nods, makes a note, changes the distribution. No fanfare, no decree. You watch the machine work. You walk with her later to a small alcove beside the library. There's a pot of ink warming over a low flame and a scroll half unfurled on a stone slab. The heading reads, Names of the Salted Bread Wives. It's a ledger, but also a web. These are women in the provinces who manage emergency grain loaves mixed with salt, olive oil, and crushed lentil packed tightly into date palm baskets. They're distributed only under orders from the Lady of Susa, a name some don't even realize means Atossa. One entry is underlined. You ask why. She says nothing. But the woman's name is later found etched on a silver seal shipped to the Persian Gulf, accompanied by a bolt of cloth and a charm against mildew. Subtle reward, because when you feed people before they hunger, they follow you before you speak. That afternoon, Atossa receives a visitor, an old satrap's widow wrapped in veils, her hands covered in rings that clink as she pours tea. They speak of nothing, flowers, old stories, a funny misinterpretation of a Greek proverb. And then the widow says, they say you've made Xerxes king. Atossa sips her tea. They say many things, but he listens to you. He listens to many, and yet here I am. Atossa smiles. You've always come when it matters. Later, when the widow leaves, a letter is dispatched to a coastal garrison. You never learn what it says. Only that within days, a minor uprising dies without rising at all. Historians still argue whether Atossa held official powers in the Imperial Council. But you know the truth, titles don't rule empires, relationships do. And she tends hers like she does her garden, with patience, with pruning, and when needed, quiet replanting. That night she returns to the same spot under the fig trees. You sit beside her this time. Neither of you speak. She gently presses her fingers to the soil. Most people think empires grow from thrones, she whispers. But they grow from dirt. Rain doesn't come often to Susa, but tonight it does. Soft, steady, not enough to flood, but just enough to coat the tiles in sheen and perfume the air with earth. You follow Atossa through the outer corridors, where braziers crackle and the walls glisten with reflections of firelight. The guards wear hoods, the servants walk faster. But Atossa, she slows down. She's listening. The empire is uneasy, not visibly, not loudly, but in small ways grain prices shift slightly. Satraps send fewer formal greetings. A caravan from Bactria arrives late bearing news of an unusually dry season. Famine has not arrived, but its shadow is on the horizon. You watch Atossa in a chamber you've never seen before. Stone shelves carved into the wall filled with tablets and ledgers, spices and linen sacks, beads strung into rows. It smells of dried thyme and ink. This is not her treasury. It's her counterweight. Here are her reserves, food cloth, even people. The salted bread wives you saw before. Their names reappear here along with codes marking their region, loyalty, readiness. She doesn't need to ask the empire for help. She's already holding its balance. You're handed a tablet not to read but to carry. You walk with her past a tiled courtyard that hums with distant thunder into the smaller granary tucked beneath the temple wing. It's guarded not by soldiers, but by elderly women veiled silent watching. They bow as Atossa enters, not deeply, just enough to suggest they've bowed before only one woman in their lives. Inside, baskets of flatbread are lined in orderly rows, dried figs, legumes, jars of salt sealed with wax. This, she says, feeds 4 provinces for 3 weeks. And if they never go hungry, you ask, she smiles. Then they remember who kept them full. Historians don't record these numbers. No epic tablet declares Atossa prevented famine, but provincial unrest stays low. Grain riots never come. And a letter from a village elder says simply, "We thank the Queen's hand, which feeds us without demanding praise." There's more. Atossa knows the famine hasn't struck, but she acts as if it already has. She sends word to local temples, increase sacrifices to Anahita, the goddess of water. Not for devotion, for spectacle. Let the people see that the court is paying attention to the sky. In Elam, she arranges for dancers to perform at water well ceremonies of abundance. The satrap there resists at first. He says the people aren't worried. Atossa is, she replies. That's enough. Mainstream historians often credit Darius's administration with the divine illusion of control, a term coined centuries later. But the real magician is Atossa. She doesn't conjure. She adjusts the lighting. Later you watch as a messenger arrives from Ecbatana. His cloak is soaked, his face lined with dust and rain. He kneels, holds out a clay tablet. It's cracked at the edge. She reads it carefully. Bandits attacked a supply route. Grain was taken. The satrap blames weather. But Atossa knows better. She calls for 3 things: more guards, yes. A new route, yes. And a gift, not to the satrap, to the village nearby. A shipment of dyes and fresh loaves. Enough to stir a story, the queen provides what the satrap cannot. Later she murmurs, "We don't always need to punish the wrong man, only to outperform him." You walk with her into the Hall of Mirrors, an enclosed walkway lined with polished bronze panels. In the flickering light, she seems to multiply dozens of Atossas in every direction, each one slightly different. In one reflection, she looks tired. In another, triumphant. In another, absent. She stops, gazes at her reflection. Empires don't fear famine, she says. They fear doubt. She turns to you. If I vanish tomorrow, would they still follow my voice? You don't answer. Not because you don't know, but because you do. Yes, they would. Not because she shouted commands, but because she fed the hungry before they knew they were starving. Because she let the credit go to others. Because her power was always quiet enough to be mistaken for providence. Historians still argue whether Atossa was beloved or merely respected. But does it matter? The people sleep with full bellies. The courtiers praise the king, but mirror her. That night the rain finally slows. You sit in her chamber beside the quiet hearth while she opens a small box. Inside, dried rose petals, one for each major province, faded, fragrant. She picks up the one for Egypt and places it on the sill where the wind can take it. Then she leans back. The wind always returns, she says. And in the pause that follows, you understand, so will loyalty. Because while kings are remembered in battle songs, queens like Atossa are remembered in full pantries, calm markets, and unburned cities. You're standing at the edge of a garden wall where the vines grow thick and the breeze carries more than fragrance, it carries news. The kind that doesn't ride in with messengers or wear polished sandals. The kind that arrives folded in corners of gossip and dreams half remembered in silence. The Greeks have done something loud, a minor uprising, a rebellion in Ionia, Persian territory, on the western edge of the empire. The cities that once bowed now snarl. They burn tribute halls, rally under strange slogans, and whisper names not of gods but of freedom. Darius hears of it, of course. His rage is predictable, his response military. But Atossa, her response is stillness. She receives the news seated in her private study, peeling a quince with a small bronze blade. The fruit curls like parchment as the peel drops into her lap. She says nothing for a long time. Then and now they knock. Mainstream historians mark the Ionian Revolt as the spark that leads to the Greco-Persian Wars. But here and now, in this quiet moment, you see its ember reflected in Atossa's eyes, not with fear, but with clarity. They were always going to resist, she says, because we did not understand them. You follow her as she walks through her private library, rows of scrolls in many tongues. She pulls one at random, a weathered Greek poem. Not Homer, something older, raw. She reads it aloud slowly, as if tasting each word. Then she looks to you. Poets know where the spears will land before the generals do. A courier arrives with updates the cities of Miletus and Ephesus are stirring. Athens and Eretria have offered ships, men, and arrogance. The empire is not wounded yet, but it is insulted, and for Darius, that's enough. But Atossa, she is less interested in revenge and more in the moment the wave began to crest. She calls for a map, one of her own, from her secret room. It shows not just topography, but cultural ripples, arrows where ideas travel, crosshatches where rivalries fester. Athens is marked in deep red. She presses a fingertip to it. They don't just fight with swords. They fight with theater, with words. She doesn't underestimate them. That's what separates her from so many others at court. You can feel it in how she walks, like a queen used to carrying power in soft hands, and understanding it might slip through fingers made arrogant by war drums. You remember that Greek captive she questioned in the harem? She summons him again. What will they do next, she asks. He frowns. They'll argue. Then they'll vote. Then they'll surprise you. She nods. And will they run when our ships land? Some, he admits, but not all. Historians still debate how much Atossa influenced the decision to punish Athens. Her name doesn't appear in the war records. No formal command, no seal. But before Darius makes his decree, she does something simple. She commissions a robe, not for herself, for Xerxes. It's made of layered wool and linen, dyed in storm gray, stitched with silver thread to resemble waves. At the hem, a single motif, a falcon, catching a fish midair. She leaves it where Darius will see it. Not a message, a suggestion. Darius decides Persia will go west. You are present that evening when Atossa speaks privately with her son. It won't be a quick war, she warns him. Xerxes replies, we are not quick. She laughs quietly. No, my son, but they are. You walk with her later to her balcony, where the night sky seems low enough to reach. The stars are familiar now, Orion rising, the twins chasing the horizon. They know our name now, she says. And that is dangerous. Why, you ask? Because names can be cursed or sung. A strange moment follows. A bird lands on the railing. A nightjar, soft-footed and curious. It looks at her. She looks back. I do not want songs written about me, she says softly. I want results. That's the difference. That's always been the difference. Kings build monuments. She builds momentum. The next day, preparations begin. Quietly at first, ships readied, envoys called back from the coast, scrolls rewritten to frame war as response, not ambition. Atossa does not join the war council, but its chairs were arranged by her steward, and its lighting adjusted by her handmaidens, and its silence shaped by the fact that no one wants her disapproval. She returns to the garden that evening. The crocus bulbs she planted weeks ago are beginning to bloom. You ask if she's worried. No, she replies. They've woken us. They think it's clever to strike the lion while he dreams. She kneels, brushing soil from a petal. But they'll learn even dreaming we watch. You don't expect the silence to feel this heavy. Atossa is seated in her inner chamber, the door barely open, the lamps dimmer than usual. Outside, the empire hums generals preparing for war, satraps sharpening rhetoric, ships being built at ports that smell of salt and cedar. Inside, a queen prepares for absence, not her own but Darius's. He has grown frail. His voice, once commanding, now trails off mid-sentence. His appetite fades with the moon cycle. The man who ruled the world's largest empire now spends most of his days gazing at walls, as if remembering where they came from. But Atossa, she is sharper than ever. This isn't mourning. This is transition. She sits beside Darius at dusk, holding his hand not in romance, but in reassurance. She reads to him sometimes old verses in Old Persian that echo like lullabies. Other times she simply lets silence fill the space between them. Then one evening she leans close and whispers something. You're not close enough to hear it, but you see Darius blink and nod. The next morning, word spreads across the court. Xerxes has been formally named successor in writing. Not just acknowledged, declared, it's done, but she is not. You follow her that day through the palace. She visits 3 chambers. You've never seen one belonging to the royal mint, one where scribes copy laws, and one where the temple records births and deaths. In each, she lingers briefly, leaves a token, a scroll, a signature. These are not gestures. They are anchors. Historians still puzzle over how smooth the transition was from Darius to Xerxes. They wonder why no major rebellion surged, why the provinces stayed silent, why the empire did not tremble when its architect began to fade. But here you are, watching the blueprint unfold. That evening, Atossa summons Xerxes. He arrives in formal robe, bearing signs of both youth and restraint. He bows. She nods toward a table where scrolls are arranged like weapons. These, she says, are your enemies. He frowns. Words, she nods. Misread them, and you lose cities. Ignore them, and you lose loyalty. Rewrite them too soon, and you lose yourself. He studies them. One bears the name of Athens, another Babylon, a third simply marked with a spiral. She lets him ask no more questions. Later, she walks alone in the garden. You trail behind, quiet. She stops beside a pomegranate tree, its fruit just beginning to split. She plucks one, hands it to you. You know what this means, don't you? You nod. Fertility, legacy, rebirth. She smiles faintly. Also, it stains. You walk with her to her private sanctuary, a small domed space with open slats at the top. Moonlight spills in like a slow-moving river. In the center, a cushion. She kneels. You do too. Do you believe they will love him, she asks. You hesitate. I believe they'll follow him. Good, she says. Love is unreliable. She unrolls a small scroll. It's not political. It's a list. Names. Not nobles, not advisors. But women, midwives, merchants, dancers, couriers, attendants, all from different corners of the empire. Some names you recognize. Most you don't. This, she says, is the real record of power. You ask if she'll show it to Xerxes. No, she says. He must earn his own list. The fire crackles, the moon shifts, time leans inward. Historians still argue about her final years in court, whether she receded from public life or became a silent hand behind the throne. But they miss something important. Atossa doesn't vanish. She withdraws strategically. She lets Xerxes step forward, but only after she has paved the floor smooth beneath him. You notice that the spiral symbol, once stamped on robes and scrolls, now appears carved into stone at the base of a pillar near the palace entrance. Small, unlabeled, but unmistakable. A quiet mark, not of conquest, of completion. That night she sleeps early. For the first time in weeks, no scrolls by her bed, no sandals waiting at the foot of the chaise. You sit nearby, the palace hushed. The world is shifting, but the center holds. Because she is still there. The torches along the eastern ramparts flicker against the pre-dawn haze. You stand at the edge of the palace gardens, looking down toward the training field where soldiers sharpen blades and drill in rhythm, even as the stars begin to fade. The war drums haven't sounded yet, but the war is already walking. Xerxes is king now, publicly, officially, irrevocably. The court wears it like new linen, a bit stiff, still adjusting to the shape. Some faces smile too wide. Others bow too long. But beneath the pomp, there's tension, the kind that trembles before the first move. Atossa, however, is calm. You find her seated in a smaller pavilion just outside the Hall of Shields. It's a structure few visit, part archive, part armory, part meditation space. It's where strategies go to be weighed, not declared, where whispers become plans. On the table before her, a replica of a trireme, tiny sails raised. Beside it, a figurine of a lion sculpted from ivory. She picks up the ship and sets it beside the lion. Strategy, she murmurs, is not about speed. It's about placement. You sit, Wait. She does not speak of war. She speaks of wind. They will not expect the silence she says. They will hear our sails and think they are winning until they aren't. That's Atossa's genius. Where Darius roared, she maneuvers. Where generals plan, she listens. Mainstream accounts attribute the march toward Greece to Xerxes and the revenge-driven echo of Marathon. But you sitting here know it began years earlier in soft decisions, in scented scrolls in a queen's private garden. She watches the soldiers in the distance, not like a mother, not like a strategist, like an author watching a chapter unfold. You notice something curious: her bracelets are gone. The rings, the earrings. Even the heavy embroidered hem of her robe has been replaced with plain indigo cotton. Regal, yes, but quieter. Faded but deliberate. This is not retreat. This is preparation for invisibility. I've given him everything I can, she says softly. The rest must be his to lose. She doesn't look bitter or proud. She looks finished. There's a rare moment, quiet, unguarded, where she rubs a spot on her wrist where a bangle once rested. He doesn't see what I see, yet she admits. But he will, or he won't. You ask if she'll remain at court. No. A pause. But I will remain in the court. She smiles at your confusion, then explains my name, my stories, my echoes. That's enough. It's dusk again when the final preparations for departure are complete. Ships at the ports, riders on the road, the empire humming toward war like a loom winding tight. Atossa walks to her balcony one last time. The breeze carries with it the scent of cedarwood sea air and something older dust from long-forgotten capitals, from Babylon, from Sogdia, from cities whose names no longer matter. You watch her stand there lit by the last orange of sun. No crown, no speech, no audience. Just a woman whose shadow once stretched from the Nile to the Aegean. And then she whispers, not to you, not to anyone, but to the air itself, let them think it was all his idea. Wind down 300 words. And now as the firelight fades from the queen's chamber, and the last echoes of her sandals disappear into the quiet of polished stone, you exhale. Slowly. The night folds gently around you, like woven silk, cool against your skin, and the empire, vast, complicated, magnificent, feels distant again. Like a dream you almost remember. You rest your head on the softness of imagined pillows, still hearing the distant rhythms of the court, the rustle of scrolls, the murmur of decisions made long before their consequences unfold. Atossa is gone now, at least from the scene, but her presence lingers like perfume pressed into robes, like old ink that never quite fades. The soldiers march, the ships sail, the empire turns. But you stay still. You've seen how power moves not in thunder, but in ripples. In robes, in scent, in silence. You've felt the weight of a whisper stronger than a sword. You've walked behind a queen who ruled from shadows and garden paths, who never needed to shout to change history. And now that garden is quiet, you lie there in that calm. Let your breath slow, let your shoulders drop, let the heaviness of the day melt from your hands. You've journeyed across an empire without taking a single step, and now you don't need to move at all. Sleep now. The story is told, the queen has spoken, and the world is quiet.